The Kang family mansion sat on a hill above Seoul, glass and stone catching the late afternoon light. Tonight it was full of flowers, gold balloons, and the low chatter of guests who had been invited to celebrate a birthday no one truly believed would be happy. Inside, a long table held a cake with 7 candles. Waiters moved quietly between the guests. A string quartet played somewhere near the garden doors. Everything had been arranged with the kind of precision only money and desperation could produce. At the head of the table sat a small girl in a white dress, her hair braided with tiny pearls. Her name was Kang Ha-eun, and she was turning 7 years old. She did not touch her cake. She did not look at her gifts. Her eyes stayed fixed on her own hands, resting flat against the white tablecloth. Her father knelt beside her chair. Kang Min-jae was one of the most powerful men in South Korea, a man whose name appeared in business magazines and whose company employed thousands. But in this moment he was only a father, his tie loosened, his voice soft. "Ha-eun, make a wish." The room went quiet. Guests who had come to watch a rich man's daughter blow out her candles instead watched a little girl stare at the flame like it belonged to someone else's life. She did not smile. She did not speak. 3 years earlier, something had happened in this house. Something small enough that no adult would have thought twice about it. But in the mind of a 4-year-old, it had grown into a weight too heavy to carry and too terrible to say out loud. A narrator's voice might have said it best. For 3 years, the richest man in Seoul had searched every hospital, every specialist, every therapist in the country, trying to find someone who could bring back his daughter's voice. He had spent more money chasing an answer than most people would see in a lifetime. But no doctor could fix what was wrong with Ha-eun because none of them knew the real reason she had stopped speaking. She was not silent because she had forgotten how to talk. She was silent because somewhere inside her small heart, she believed she did not deserve to. If you are watching this from somewhere far from Seoul tonight, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels before it ends. The candles burned low. Someone in the crowd whispered that the wax was dripping onto the cake. Min-jae reached out and gently cupped his daughter's small hands in his own. "You don't have to wish out loud," he said quietly. "Only for her. Just wish." Ha-eun closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. Then she leaned forward and blew out the candles without a sound. The guests clapped politely. The quartet resumed playing. Somewhere near the back of the room, Min-jae's mother pressed a handkerchief to her mouth and turned away so no one would see her cry. No one at that party could see the memory playing behind Ha-eun's closed eyes. A kitchen. A phone call. Her mother laughing. A small cup of water spilled and forgotten. A fall. A silence deeper than any birthday candle could hold. Part 1. The house that stopped talking. The Kang mansion was beautiful, in the way that empty things are sometimes beautiful. Marble floors that echoed. A garden that a team of workers kept perfectly trimmed, though no one played in it. A library filled with books that had not been read since the day Min-jae's wife, Yoon-hee, had died. Min-jae ran his company with the same discipline he had once used to build his marriage, to be present, to be strong, to never let his family see him struggle. Now that discipline felt like a cage. He woke before dawn, worked until the sun disappeared, and came home to a daughter who greeted him with silence, and a house that greeted him with the same. Ha-eun's days followed a strict pattern that the household staff had learned not to disturb. She woke, dressed herself without help, and went straight to a small desk in her room where she drew pictures no one was allowed to see. She avoided the kitchen whenever possible. If water spilled anywhere near her, even a single drop, she would freeze completely until someone wiped it away. The household staff had grown used to this. The nannies who lasted more than a few months learned to move carefully around her, to speak gently, to never ask her direct questions she could not answer with a nod or a shake of her head. 3 therapists had already come and gone, each one convinced they understood grief, none of them understanding guilt. Min-jae had tried everything a father with unlimited resources could try. A therapist flown in from London, a specialist from a children's hospital in Boston, a monk his mother insisted could help through meditation. Nothing worked, because every single one of them was trying to heal a girl who was grieving her mother, when the truth was that Ha-eun believed she had killed her. At night, after the house had gone quiet, Min-jae would sometimes stand outside his daughter's door and listen. He never heard crying. He never heard anything at all, which somehow frightened him more. One evening, his mother visited, as she often did, carrying disapproval the way other grandmothers carried baked goods. "You cannot keep hiring strangers to fix her," she said, seated stiffly in the sitting room, while Min-jae poured tea he would not drink. "She needs family. She needs her father to stop working so much and start being present." "I am present," Min-jae said, though even he did not fully believe it. "Being in the house is not the same as being present," his mother replied. "You have built walls around yourself just as high as the ones around her. Perhaps that is why you cannot reach her. You are both hiding from the same thing." Min-jae did not answer. He knew she was right, and that was exactly why the words stung. Part 2. Isabella. Isabella Williams had come to Seoul for reasons that had nothing to do with the Kang family. She had grown up in Atlanta, the daughter of a school counselor and a pastor, and had spent years working with children who carried more grief than their small bodies should have had to hold. After a painful breakup and the loss of her own mother the year before, she had taken a job overseas, partly to build a new life, and partly to run from the parts of her old one that still hurt to look at. She had not planned on working for one of Korea's wealthiest families. The placement agency had simply told her there was a girl who needed a companion, not quite a nanny, not quite a therapist, someone patient enough to sit with silence without trying to fill it. Isabella arrived at the mansion on a gray Tuesday morning, dressed simply, carrying a bag full of art supplies instead of a resume. She was led into a sitting room where Min-jae waited, his expression polite but guarded, the look of a man who had interviewed a dozen people before her and expected nothing different this time. "My daughter does not speak," he said, before Isabella had even sat down. "She has not spoken in 3 years. I have hired specialists from 4 countries. None of them have helped. I do not expect you to be different." Isabella met his eyes calmly. "Then I won't try to be different. I'll just try to be honest with her." Something in the way she said it made Min-jae pause. He led her to Ha-eun's room himself, something he rarely did with new hires. Ha-eun sat at her small desk, drawing, her back straight, her focus absolute. She did not turn around when the door opened. Isabella did not rush toward her the way the others had. She did not crouch down and speak in the too sweet voice adults use with broken children. Instead, she walked quietly to the empty side of the desk, sat down on the floor beside it, and pulled out her own sketchbook. She began to draw. Minutes passed. Ha-eun glanced sideways, curious despite herself. Isabella said nothing, simply continued sketching a small bird perched on a branch. When she finished, she slid the drawing gently toward Ha-eun, not as an offering that demanded a response, just as a quiet gift. Ha-eun looked at it for a long moment. Then, for the first time in longer than Min-jae could remember, she picked up her own pencil and began to draw something back. It was not a word, it was not a sentence, but it was the first time his daughter had responded to another human being who was not family, and Min-jae, watching from the doorway, felt something in his chest crack open for the first time in 3 years. Part 3. Trust, built in silence. Isabella did not push. Day after day, she arrived at the same time, sat in the same spot, and let Ha-eun set the pace of everything between them. Some days they drew side by side without exchanging a single word. Other days Isabella would tell small stories about her own childhood in Atlanta, about her little brother who used to steal her crayons, about the dog she'd had growing up who was terrified of thunderstorms. She never asked Ha-eun to respond. She simply let her listen. Slowly, the girl began to change in small ways only a careful observer would notice. She started leaving her bedroom door open. She began sitting closer to Isabella. Once, she reached out and touched Isabella's braids, curious about the texture, and Isabella had laughed softly and let her explore, telling her the story of how her grandmother used to braid her hair every Sunday before church. Min-jae watched all of this from a careful distance, the way a man watches a fire he is not sure he trusts yet, close enough to feel its warmth, far enough to run if it burned him. He found himself arranging his schedule to be home earlier, just to catch the last 20 minutes of Isabella's visits. He told himself it was for Ha-eun's sake. He was not yet ready to admit it was also for his own. One evening, after Isabella had gathered her things to leave, Min-jae found himself walking her to the door instead of leaving it to the staff. "She let you touch her hair today," he said. "She has never done that with anyone, not even her grandmother." Isabella smiled, tired but genuine. "She's not broken, Mr. Kang. Everyone keeps treating her like something that needs to be fixed." She just needs to feel safe enough to be herself again. And you believe you can give her that? I believe she already has it in her. I'm just trying not to get in the way of it. Min-jae studied her for a long moment, something unfamiliar moving behind his composed expression. Most people who come into this house try to impress me. You have never once tried. I'm not here for you, Mr. Kang, Isabella said, not unkindly. I'm here for her. He should have found the words presumptuous. Instead, standing in his own doorway, watching this stranger walk toward her car in the fading light, Kang Min-jae felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Hope. If this story is holding your attention so far, make sure you are subscribed, because the next part of this story is where everything begins to change. Part 4. Cracks in the Wall. Weeks passed. Isabella became a fixture in the household, not quite family, but no longer a stranger either. She learned the rhythms of the house, the way Ha-eun flinched at the sound of running water, the way she avoided the kitchen entirely, always taking the long way around through the hallway rather than passing through it. Isabella noticed these patterns the way a careful reader notices repeated symbols in a story. She began to understand that Ha-eun's silence was not simply grief. Grief did not usually come with this kind of specific fear, this careful avoidance of one particular room, one particular sound. She began spending more time in Ha-eun's room, looking, with permission, through the folders of drawings the girl had accumulated over 3 years. Most were ordinary: flowers, animals, her mother's face drawn from memory, softened and idealized the way children remember the people they love. But tucked toward the back of one folder, Isabella found something different: a kitchen, drawn in harsh, frantic lines, a small figure in the corner, a puddle of water on the floor, colored in dark blue, filling far more space on the page than water reasonably should, and near the center, a larger figure lying down, unmoving. Isabella's hands went still. She did not confront Ha-eun that day. She simply placed the drawing back exactly where she had found it and sat with the girl a while longer, her mind working carefully behind a calm exterior. That evening, she asked to speak with Min-jae privately. "I need to ask you something," she said, once they were alone in his study. "What exactly happened the night your wife died?" Min-jae's jaw tightened. It was a question no one had asked him directly in a long time, not because people did not wonder, but because grief had built an unspoken rule that the topic was forbidden. "It was an accident," he said finally. Yoon-hee received a phone call. "Good news. We were expecting a second child, and the doctor had just confirmed everything looked healthy." She was overjoyed. She was in the kitchen, walking, celebrating on the phone with her sister. She must have slipped. She fell and struck her head on the counter. "By the time I got home, it was too late." Was Ha-eun there? Min-jae's expression shifted, confusion mixing with something closer to dread. "She was in the kitchen with her mother, yes. She was the one who found her. Why are you asking me this?" Isabella hesitated, then carefully described the drawing. Min-jae sat down slowly, as though the air had been pulled out of the room. "There was water on the floor that night," he said quietly. "The investigators mentioned it. They said Yoon-hee must have slipped on it. I never thought about where it came from. I never thought Ha-eun would have—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I think," Isabella said gently, "that somewhere in your daughter's mind, she believes that water was hers, and she has spent 3 years believing that a mistake she made as a 4-year-old is the reason her mother is gone." Part 5. The weight a child should never carry. That night, Min-jae did not sleep. He sat outside his daughter's door long after the house had gone dark, replaying the same accident report he had read 100 times 3 years ago, searching every line for a detail he had somehow missed. The next morning, when Isabella arrived, he asked to be present during her time with Ha-eun for the first time. Isabella agreed, though she gently warned him that whatever happened, he needed to let his daughter lead. They sat together in Ha-eun's room, the 3 of them, in a silence that felt different from all the silences before it. Isabella slid a blank piece of paper toward Ha-eun. "You don't have to draw anything you don't want to," she said softly, "but if there's something you've been carrying, something heavy, sometimes it helps to put it on paper instead of keeping it inside." Ha-eun stared at the blank page for a long time. Her small hand trembled slightly as she picked up a pencil. She drew the kitchen again. The puddle of water, herself in the corner, her mother on the floor. This time, she added something new, a small stick figure version of herself, kneeling beside her mother, mouth open in a shape that could only be a scream that had never actually made a sound. Then, beneath the drawing, in shaky, uneven letters that a 7-year-old had clearly practiced writing many times in private, she wrote 3 words. I killed Mommy. Min-jae made a sound he did not recognize as his own voice, something between a gasp and a sob. He moved to kneel beside his daughter, but Isabella gently placed a hand on his arm, a silent request for patience. Ha-eun, Isabella said softly. Can you tell us what happened? You don't have to use your voice if you're not ready. You can point to the drawing. Ha-eun's finger trembled as it moved across the page. She pointed to the puddle of water, then to herself, then to her mother, lying still. You spilled water, Isabella said gently, and Ha-eun nodded, tears now falling freely down her small face. And you believe that's why your mother fell? Another nod, this one accompanied by a sound, small and broken, the first sound anyone in that room had heard her make in 3 years, that was not a whimper of distress. Min-jae could not hold back any longer. He knelt down fully and gathered his daughter into his arms, and for the first time since the funeral, he let her feel him cry. Ha-eun, he said, his voice breaking over every word. Listen to me. You were 4 years old. 4-year-olds spill water. It is not a crime. It is not a sin. It was an accident. A terrible, terrible accident. But it was never, ever your fault. Ha-eun buried her face into her father's shoulder, her small body shaking. Isabella wiped her own eyes and spoke softly. You didn't take your mother away from you, sweetheart. You just happened to be there when something impossible happened. That's not the same as causing it. Do you understand? Ha-eun did not answer with words. Not yet. But she nodded, and she let herself be held, and for the first time in 3 years, the room did not feel like it was holding its breath. If a story like this has ever made you think about a secret you carried as a child that no one ever knew about, I want to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes writing it down for strangers is easier than saying it out loud to the people who love us. Part 6. Learning to speak again. Healing did not arrive all at once. Isabella had warned Min-jae of this, gently, the day after the drawing. A wound held for 3 years does not close overnight, simply because the truth has finally been spoken. But something had shifted in the house. Ha-eun no longer avoided the kitchen entirely. She still hesitated at the doorway some mornings, her small body remembering what her mind was slowly learning to release, but she no longer refused to enter at all. It started so quietly that Isabella almost missed it one afternoon, a few notes under her breath while she colored, a tune that Min-jae recognized instantly as a song Yoon-hee used to sing while cooking. He did not interrupt. He simply stood in the hallway and listened, his hand pressed against his chest, as though he could physically hold the moment there. Isabella's presence in the house had become something neither she nor Min-jae had planned for. What began as professional visits slowly stretched into shared dinners, quiet conversations on the terrace after Ha-eun had gone to bed, moments where 2 people who had both been shaped by loss found, almost by accident, that they understood each other in ways few others could. You never talk about your own mother, Min-jae observed one evening, the 2 of them seated outside as the city lights spread below the hill like scattered stars. Isabella was quiet for a moment. She died last year, cancer. I was in the room when she took her last breath, and some days I still feel like I should have caught it sooner, should have pushed the doctors harder, should have done something different. That sounds like guilt, Min-jae said softly. The same thing Ha-eun has been carrying. Isabella gave a small, sad smile. I suppose that's part of why I understood her so quickly. Grief and guilt like to pretend they're the same feeling. They're not. Grief says, I miss you. Guilt says, this is my fault. My job, has always been to help children tell the difference. I don't always practice what I preach. Min-jae reached over, hesitating only slightly, before placing his hand over hers. Maybe we are both still learning that lesson. Isabella did not pull away. Part 7. The first word. 2 more months passed. Ha-eun's therapist, a new one Isabella had recommended, someone gentler and more attuned to trauma than the previous specialists, noted real progress in every session. Ha-eun had begun using simple gestures more freely, nodding, pointing, even mouthing words without sound, as though her voice were a door she was slowly testing the hinges of before opening it fully. Min-jae had also changed. He left the office earlier now, arriving home in time for dinner most nights, something his assistant noted with quiet astonishment. He had stopped filling every silence in the house with more work and started filling it instead with his daughter's presence, reading to her at night, sitting beside her while she drew, simply being there, in a way he had convinced himself for 3 years he already was. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind that later Min-jae would remember as the most important ordinary evening of his life. They were in the kitchen, all 3 of them. Isabella was teaching Ha-eun how to make her grandmother's cornbread, a small piece of Isabella's own childhood she had chosen to share. Flour dusting the counter, Ha-eun's small hands carefully measuring ingredients under close supervision. A cup of water sat near the edge of the counter. Ha-eun reached for it and, in a moment of ordinary childhood clumsiness, knocked it over. Water spread across the counter and dripped onto the floor. For a moment, the entire kitchen seemed to freeze. Min-jae's heart stopped. Isabella did not move suddenly, did not gasp, did not react with the fear that might have confirmed to Ha-eun that something terrible had just happened again. Ha-eun stared at the spilled water. Her small hands trembled. Min-jae took a slow step forward, ready to catch her if the memory pulled her under. Then Ha-eun looked up, first at the water, then at her father, then at Isabella, and something in her face shifted. Not fear, but recognition. Recognition that nothing terrible was happening. That water on a floor was simply water on a floor. She grabbed a towel from the counter and wiped it up herself, her hands steady. Then she looked at her father, and in a voice rough from 3 years of disuse, small and cracked but unmistakably hers, she said one word, "Daddy." Min-jae's knees nearly gave out beneath him. He dropped to the floor in front of his daughter, his hands cupping her face as though she might disappear, if he did not hold on tightly enough. "Say it again," he whispered, tears streaming freely down his face. "Please, say it again." "Daddy," Ha-eun said again, and this time she smiled, the first full smile Min-jae had seen on her face in 3 years. "I spilled water. It's okay. Accidents happen." Isabella turned away, pretending to busy herself with the cornbread batter, giving father and daughter their moment, though her own tears fell freely onto the counter. Part 8. A family rebuilt, not replaced. News of Ha-eun's recovery spread quietly through the family, then through close friends, though Min-jae made sure it never reached the press. This was not a story for magazines. It belonged only to the people who had lived it. Ha-eun's voice grew stronger each day. She spoke to her teachers, to her grandmother, to the household staff who had wondered for years if they would ever hear her laugh again. She still had quiet days, days where the memory of her mother pulled at her more heavily, but Isabella had taught her, and taught Min-jae too, that grief did not need to be fixed. It only needed to be carried honestly, together, instead of alone. Min-jae's mother visited more often now, and one afternoon, watching Isabella braid Ha-eun's hair on the terrace while the girl chattered on about a book she was reading, the old woman turned to her son with an expression he had not seen in years. "She has given us back our family," she said quietly. "Do not be foolish enough to let her walk away." Min-jae did not need the advice, though he appreciated it. He had already made up his mind weeks earlier, waiting only for the right moment, and for Ha-eun's blessing, which he asked for one evening, in the quietest way possible. "Would it be all right with you," he asked his daughter, "if Isabella became a bigger part of our family? Not just as your teacher, as someone who stays." Ha-eun considered this with the seriousness only a child can bring to matters of the heart. "Does that mean she'll be here for breakfast too? Not just after school?" "If she agrees, yes." Ha-eun grinned. "Then ask her. But don't mess it up, Daddy." Min-jae laughed. A full, unguarded laugh that surprised even himself. He asked Isabella that weekend, on the same terrace where they had first admitted their fears to each other. The city lights spread below them, like a field of stars that had finally stopped feeling so far away. She said yes. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Kang mansion no longer echoed. Music played from the kitchen most evenings, a mixture of Korean ballads Yoon-hee used to hum and old soul records Isabella had grown up with. The two traditions blending in a way that felt less like replacement and more like expansion. A framed photograph of Yoon-hee still sat in the living room, given a place of honor rather than hidden away. Ha-eun visited it often, sometimes talking to it the way children talk to memories they have learned to carry with love instead of fear. On a warm evening in spring, the family gathered in the garden for Ha-eun's 8th birthday. Unlike the year before, there was no heavy silence hanging over the celebration. Ha-eun ran between the guests, laughing, showing off a new dress, insisting that everyone try a slice of the cornbread she had helped Isabella bake that morning, a strange addition to a Korean birthday table that had somehow become tradition. When it came time for the candles, Min-jae knelt beside his daughter once more. "Make a wish," he said. Ha-eun closed her eyes, and this time, she said her wish out loud, for everyone to hear. "I wish that everybody who feels like something is their fault finds someone who tells them the truth, the way Isabella told me." She blew out the candles, and the garden erupted into applause. And somewhere in that sound was every year of silence, finally, fully broken. Healing does not mean forgetting the people we have lost. It means learning that love does not leave when a person does. It only changes shape, and sometimes, if we are patient enough, it comes back to us wearing a new face, ready to help us carry what we could not carry alone. If this story moved you even a little, let us know in the comments which part hit you hardest. Stories like this only reach more people when you share them, so if you believe someone else needs to hear this tonight, send it their way.